And for this PhD Pathways conversation, and this one we're going to be talking about entrepreneurship and venture capital with our guest, Craig Cummings, who is an alum of the political science department here with a PhD from that department. And his current position is as founder and chief executive of Moonshots Capital, but we're going to hear all about your path. And so I always like to start by letting the guest introduce themselves. So if you wouldn't mind, Craig, tell us a bit about yourself.
Sure. Well, I mean, it's funny, Rachel, just hearing you say that. When I was in those chairs, if you will, never did I think, fast forward a decade, I'd be seeing venture capital and entrepreneurship. So I guess that's my first talking point is, you figure it out along the way. But that's right. I was a West Point graduate, and then I was an Army intelligence officer. And most of that time was with the National Security Agency. I then went back to Columbia and did a PhD, political science, as Rachel mentioned, en route to teaching at West Point, which is West Point has a tenured faculty, and then it has a rotating faculty. And so I was an active duty Army officer, and I ended up having what was tantamount to a 3-year sabbatical at Columbia. And I did most of my PhD. I entered West Point ABD, and then I finished the PhD when I was teaching on the faculty at West Point. I then, after Columbia, after West Point, went back out in the Army, took trips to deployment to Afghanistan, multiple trips to Iraq, was working with the NSA. And then literally the day that I had paid back the time that I owed the Army for having done the PhD at Columbia, which was a 5-year commitment. So what I say in entrepreneurial world, like that's called an earnout, when after you've been acquired and you have to pay back time to a company. And that was in my 17th year of service in the Army. And I said, I'm out. I'm gonna scratch the proverbial entrepreneurial itch. And so I left, and people thought I was pretty crazy, because if you do 20 years in any of the military services, you get a pension for life and medical benefits for life. But I had to scratch the proverbial entrepreneurial itch, and so I literally left and began my journey. And Rachel, I think I may have gone on too long there. I can keep going, or I can pause right there. That's a little bit of a clean break from leaving the Army to start entrepreneuring.
Yeah.
Not a word.
Well, my next question was actually just going to be the next step in the story, which was, what was that first step in your career after you left the military?
So I had been watching friends who had started businesses outside of the military, and what I ended up finding in my Army career is that I wanted to be a little bit more involved in the decision-making process. Now, the military gives us amazing decision-making opportunities, but more so from a strategic, like, wanted to see the needle, wanted to put my hand on the needle, wanted to move the needle. So as I transitioned, I framed myself into, I'm looking for a small to medium-sized company, preferably small. And I ended up partnering with a couple of West Point graduates, and we did this startup, and I was able to have some equity ownership. And so I had sort of opened myself up to many opportunities, but then I felt most comfortable in that smaller, more intimate environment. And then what's funny about, it's funny, probably the wrong word, but what happened is, here I get out in my 17th year. Like, even when I left the service, and you can imagine this Army scene, there's like a soldier dressed behind a desk, and they're stamping paperwork, and she like holds up the stamp, and she sees I'm in my 17th year, and she's like, "Sir, are you sure you want to do this?" I'm like, "Stamp it." And so, boom, and away I went. Literally 2 weeks later, my wife found a lump on her breast. 2 weeks later, double mastectomy. Now, fast forward, now I just left this massive security blanket. I'm doing a startup. My wife's in chemo. And fast forward about 4 months later, we're almost out of cash. I'm like, this, oh man. So I had to get super scrappy, pulled together a meeting of people I had worked with in the Army and at the NSA, and said, we have this idea about deploying a cellular network on the battlefield, which hasn't been done before. As crazy as it may sound, this is circa 2009. It was mostly like push-to-talk walkie-talkies. But we knew what was needed was the ability to move data, larger data like we do in cellular. So anyway, pulled the meeting together. Next thing you know, we get a big purchase order. Army general says, I love it, I want to do it. So right as we're like crashing and burning, we get a big purchase order. Then we had the stress of delivering on what we had promised to the Army. And then a couple of years later, and I'll pause after this, the military loved the software so much that they bought the software. It's like they acquired our company. They wanted it. They didn't want to have to pay license by license. So we did a big deal with the military, and then I went on to continue my journey with another startup. But that was the initial sort of military transition out.
And so for that initial startup, as I'm just thinking of like students here might be thinking about like, what are the first steps? How did you, was it that you kind of formed the company and already had an idea of what you might do? Or, because you said it was like a few months in that you came up with that idea for that particular product, but how did you kind of, in those initial stages?
It's a great question. I had actually, when I was in uniform, I had been seeding this idea with some of my friends who ended up joining this to start the company, and I'd been seeding it in the military. So sometimes I tell people, especially entrepreneurs or those who want to become entrepreneurs, I literally was working in the space, NSA, Army, saw the problem, couldn't move data on the battlefield, had an idea for a solution, left the Army, came right back to the customer and said, hey, what do you think about a cellular network? Knowing what the answer was, they're like, oh my God, are you kidding me? Yes. And so sometimes it's best, you know, when we hear founder stories, we usually are looking for that. Tell us the story. Like, why did you think of this? And, you know, many different right answers to that question, but one of them is always like, it was a pain point in my life and I had to, or a pain point in my business and I wanted to solve for it. And that's how we ended up doing cellular on the battlefield. So I'll pause. I can follow on and complement with the way I see the world and how things like that can happen. But I'll hand off to you.
Okay. Well, no, I'm interested to hear what those thoughts are. So yeah, go ahead.
Well, you know, one thing about the military is that you generally change jobs every 2 or 3 years, and that's just the nature of the beast. I mean, I'm glad that the book Range has been written, because that is very much what an Army officer's career is like. You know, you're leading soldiers over here, you're doing intelligence analysis over here, now you're teaching at West Point. It's just all these different experiences. And so I've come, you know, to believe that when it comes time to make a decision on a transition, like for everybody here, you make that decision at the time of the decision and you look at all the options available to you. And it may be, certainly academia would be one, but who knows, it could be the finance industry, it could be entrepreneurship. And then you just assess at the time what's the best option and choose it and sort of run it for 2 to 3 years. And the reason I call it out is it's a little bit different than, I know exactly what I want to be in like 20 years. Everybody struggles with that question. What am I going to be in 10 years is hard enough, or 5. So I say, don't worry about that. I say, just what right now, even if it's over here and you thought you were going this way, it's over here. That is the best opportunity. Then I say, follow that thread. You know, I know this in the backdrop of talking to Columbia PhD students, many who will pursue careers in academia, that is not the answer to the test. The answer to the test, you take the best school offer you can get, right, as a professor, assistant professor, associate professor, and then you can continue to publish and teach and climb. That's kind of like a predefined path. But for everybody else, look, getting the PhD done is just a massive deal. Most people, I don't want to say most, that's wrong, but many of my classmates didn't finish. And so the ability to complete the PhD is a very strong signal to the world, if you will, especially the job market. And I call that, I didn't win any awards with my dissertation, but I got it done. Got it done pretty quickly. And I could still be writing my dissertation today. I could still be correcting it, but I knocked it out. And so I'll talk about my elevator pitch in a minute, but maybe I'll pause there.
Yeah. Well, that's those are some great tips just in thinking about representing the accomplishment of writing a dissertation. And then also, thanks for sharing a bit about your worldview. And I think a lot of PhD students who are exploring career paths maybe recognize some of those things about the culture of academia or the general like career trajectory of academia, and what you described in entrepreneurship is kind of the opposite of like, it's not linear. You have to seize the moment, have some, foresight. It can be move very, very fast. So I think that's interesting for students to think about. So I'm curious, you've, obviously being in the military for 17 years was incredibly formative, and has kind of like influenced your path so far and will forever. Can you tease out the experience of graduate school and the PhD program in helping to prepare you for this career?
Yeah, I mean, if I had one word I had to choose in this, it would be team. And I think my Army training really set me up for success at Columbia. And this is what I mean. Like when you get the reading list, you compile the reading list for all your PhD classes in political science or whatever the discipline. It is more work than any single human being can do, in my opinion. Like, it's like bananas. You just can't, like, really? Do you really expect me to do all that? That's the way I thought of it. So when I was in the program, I was a team leader. I'd pull everyone together. I'd say, okay, we just got this many readings for the next week in Robert Shapiro's class. None of you except for, okay, maybe you, Rachel, you can do it. Like, no one else can do it. So let's organize, let's divide and conquer. Let's do notes, let's share, let's call out the executive summary. And so that was an environment. It's certainly true in the Army. It's all about team, but I learned, like, literally, what we'd say at West Point was so true at Columbia: cooperate and graduate. And it was because it was literally more work than I could humanly do. So I had to organize and be collaborative with my classmates. And so, another thing, this isn't necessarily on point, but one of the things I tried to do in the political science department was sort of bring some Army traditions around teamwork to the department. Like, when we have new professors come, I would post something to welcome them. And then we had professors leave. I'd order some gifts and we'd sort of farewell them. It's called hailing and farewelling in the military. So I tried to bring a little bit of those traditions to Columbia, but it's harder in an academic environment because it's a lot of cats, as we know, a lot of cat herding. But I also think what I learned at the PhD program is to ask the why. Probably what really enabled me. Like, even I was there when we had the Bush v. Gore craziness, and I'm in the SEPA building, and the MPA and the SEPA students are like, they're talking like, what's going on with the vote count? How could this happen? What does America think? And in the PhD department, we were just like, we weren't even talking about it. Those aren't the questions, none of the what. It's always like, why do people vote the way they do in the aggregate, right? It wasn't anything, it was so strategic. So really, I think that the PhD program armed me to be a strategic thinker by asking the bigger, higher level questions. And then, oh, by the way, you got to back it up with data, right? So it's like teaches you strategic thinking, and then finding the data, curating the data, and then using the data to inform the answering of that question. And so I haven't used I use doctor on, like when I check into Marriott hotels, I have that on my profile. If I go to a conference, I use it. I don't use it in my signature block. And that's only because I was an operator. I was a chief operating officer and a co-founder. Then I was a chief operating officer and co-founder. And sometimes if people see the PhD, they're like, well, it's correct. Even now in venture capital, it's like, is he going to overanalyze just this decision? Is it like, there's an argument to have it as a venture capitalist, and there's an argument not to have it. But I've chosen, you have to dig into my bio a little bit to even know that and it's not like I'm super proud of it. It just, I sort of wear it on the inside, if you will.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because I think, well, that we get that question all the time from students about kind of how much to emphasize it, or do I put PhD or doctor on things when I start my professional career? But it's interesting to hear you talk about you can both not use the title and sort of like publicly underemphasize it, but it doesn't mean that it's not something that was incredibly important and that you're proud of and that has influenced you in all these ways. And I think it can be hard for students to imagine sometimes, you spend like 5 to 7 years and writing, in this program and writing a dissertation, and it's hard to kind of feel like, now, this has to be something that like forever in my life is very prominent, but to kind of hold both of those things at once is probably really helpful for students to hear.
I think this gets into my elevator pitch. It's knowing your audience a little bit, right? So when I transitioned in that transition process, even though it sounded was pretty baked on this cellular idea of entrepreneurship, I did sort of test the market a little bit. And so, and I wrote an article on this. I may have shared this with you, and I think it's super relevant to PhD students about, and I can drop it in the chat. The military veteran title is "Military Veteran Transitioning to the Private Sector Needs to Act Like a Startup." And part of being a startup is having your elevator pitch down. And when in my body of professional work, I just laid it all out. Iraq, Afghanistan, NSA, PhD, Columbia, West Point. And I said, I have a Bronze Star from Afghanistan. I have a PhD from Columbia University, and I have a top secret clearance from the National Security Agency. What does that mean? It means I can lead and perform in a high stress environment. It means via the PhD that I can read, write, think, speak. And the top secret clearance means that I have the trust of the nation with its most sensitive secrets. Oh, by the way, there's only like 12 people in the world that can have those 3 things: Ivy League, PhD, top secret clearance, Bronze Star, and I know the other 11. Now, I totally made all of that up, even though I'm probably pretty close on the number, but I just plucked it out of my story. And then if I was talking to someone who I know would value the PhD, I'd lead with that bullet, because I know that that's what they'd want to hear. Like, I can be in the boardroom, present, speak. But if I knew they were looking more operator level, I'd say Bronze Star, Afghanistan. So long way of saying, use the PhD as appropriate with the right audience. And it may be that you're always using it, or you're never using it. You know what I mean? You just don't know.
Yeah, that's so helpful. And we think, thanks for reiterating that point that your audience, even when you deliver an elevator pitch, it can change depending on who you're talking to. And that doesn't mean there's nothing dishonest about that. It's just you're telling people what they need to know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So as a PhD student, the elevator pitch, I think, as you transition, as you think hard about that. And it doesn't have to be like your story is your PhD story. Your story is your research, your in writing. To me, when I see PhD candidates, I think they know how to close the deal. They can, for lack of better words, get shit done, right? Just by completing the work. And that's where I urge students not to let perfect be the enemy of good.
Mhm.
Just get it done. And that's a massive accomplishment that becomes a headline, becomes one of your talking points, but it doesn't have to be like you can go into venture. You can go every single one of these disciplines here, math, environmental sciences, any of the GSAS. What do we want in Moonshots Capital? We want like think, write, play well as a team member, and produce outstanding work. That's kind of what everybody wants. So I encourage PhD students in the same way I encourage military veterans, like think broadly about your skill set and cast the net wide.
That's great advice. What other advice would you have? So actually a few people here today are in their third year, so they have a couple years left in their PhD program. What advice would you have for students to gain experience during their PhD to help prepare them for a career in this field?
We participate with the University of Texas in the MBA program. I'm in Austin, Texas. My partner Kelly is in Los Angeles, and they have a venture fellows program where they curate 20 students, and then they sort of introduce them to private equity and venture capital in Austin. And so we were fortunate to pair with a woman, and she's in the MBA. She's doing about 10, 15 hours a week with us. We pay through UT. So she's doing free work for us. But to the extent you can get an intern, if you can come in sort of light and just say, hey, look, I have some expertise. I could do some research in the following areas. I'll do it on my dime and sort of get the door open, get in there, prove yourself. Like the conversation we just had with Morgan, is she said, I got to lean into my summer, what to do this summer. I'm like, no. We'll pay you for the summer. You stay with us. So it makes it easy for us as a VC firm. We're like, well, super talent for free initially, right? And then you set the hooks, and then that becomes a paying gig. So that's a long way of saying, to the extent you could potentially intern a few hours a week with some organizations, that might be a stretch, but it's like this, you want to scratch that itch from a curiosity perspective. Maybe it's venture, maybe it's who knows what it could be, and coming in light and user friendly for an employer. I would think about doing something like that in the third, in those years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's yeah, we talk to students about ways of gaining experience, or even just doing like informational interviews, and you never know what it'll lead to down the road in terms of like creating an opportunity that it might not be a job you see posted somewhere, but making yourself known and valuable, and you never know where that'll lead.
Well, to piggyback on that, to the extent it can be a warm introduction, like that can't. I almost hate to say it because it's almost unfair, right? But we get 1,500 inbound deals a year, roughly, right? And we invest in probably 5. And to the extent, with so much deal flow coming in, and we're triaging the deals and looking at them, saying it could be a fit. But if I get a deal from Rachel, it's like, Craig, I really think, I think you might like this one. So, insert that for a PhD student, like, hey, I think you might like Taylor. Through flexing your network muscle, like, and you've heard it 100 times, but I don't want to say it's a requirement to have a warm introduction, because cold emails have worked before. They just have to be so well crafted. Like, hey, Craig, I saw that you guys invested in this company called Shep, and this company is also in the travel space, and I think you might like what we're doing. It's complementary, and we're early stage. You know, like if it's so well written that the cold email. Otherwise, it's it's our investors, it's our founders we've backed previously, it's people in our community, it's co-investors who are like, hey, this is a hot deal. So, take that lesson learned, again, acting like a startup, get the warm introduction.
Mm-hmm.
And even in that article, which I think now you posted.
Yeah, I did.
Right. I talk about sort of forming a board of directors, like a close team, mapping a collaborative document spreadsheet. Here's who I'm targeting. Here's who knows that Craig is the POC. He reached out this day. Here's the status. Getting that forwardable email open.
Mm-hmm.
But I'd also tell third years, grind your ass off and get the deal done if you can. Again, a good enough product to get through the committee.
Yeah.
Close, as we say, as Mark Cuban says, sales cures all. And when you're in a PhD program, if you can get the deal closed, great. Now let's be realistic. I'm not going to have my head in the sand. Not everybody's going to finish the PhD. Happens all the time, right? Maybe that you get that internship, and that's what this startup called Instagram, right? And then next thing you know, still the opportunity you created by being in the Columbia ecosystem helped you land that opportunity, and you may or may not finish the PhD, but it still helped your dreams come true. You just didn't, you may end up ABD or master's or whatever. So I would not fall on my sword and finishing if it meant you could get a amazing job opportunity, like too good to be true. But again, back to rule number one, I'd make that decision at the time of the decision what to do. I would strongly consider finishing the degree, but
Mm-hmm.
may not be the right answer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you mentioned the Columbia network and just opportunities here. There is Columbia Tech Ventures, and there's a Columbia Entrepreneurship Lab and Startup Lab. So there is probably the similar kinds of things that you have at UT. They do. I'm not sure if those things existed when you were at Columbia yet, but now that's become a more robust part, and they are welcoming of students from all across the university. So that is.
Everybody can use it'd almost be like a tagline. Everybody can use a PhD student. First of all, to get into Columbia, you're threading like 6 needles, right? And then you can research, write, think. Like everything is about, especially management of data nowadays. It's all about big data. Who's comfortable with big data? So even if the craziest startup, it's almost like Apple. They don't know that they need you, but they need you, right?
Mm-hmm. So very last question, and then we'll open it up to students, is just, we talked about your initial startup, and then you've been alluding to your current work. Can you just connect the dots a little bit about the rest of your trajectory to starting a few different companies and then getting into venture capital?
Yeah, so I left military and began the entrepreneurial journey. And as I started to make money, I started doing some angel investing. And my current partner, Kelly had some minor celebrity status many years ago, but he won season 2 of The Apprentice. Worked for Donald Trump, ended up leaving, going back to LA and becoming a super angel investor, an advisor to Pandora and LinkedIn. And he and I became close friends, and he'd send me a deal. I'm like, oh, that looks kind of interesting. I like that startup's doing. Boom, write a check, and then write another check. And then people know that I'm investing. So while I was entrepreneuring, I was also side hustling with investments. My second company after that cellular company was a ground transportation app called RideScout. And it was, if you were at Columbia and you were looking to go to Midtown, we'd say, there's a scooter, there's a bus, you can walk it, there's a cab, we'd aggregate ground transportation options by price and time. And we ended up selling that to Daimler maker Mercedes-Benz a couple of years later. The dream was never fully achieved as the app sort of got integrated into another app. So then when I left after the acquisition, and I had to do what I referred to earlier as the earnout, which some of you are familiar with that term, I worked on the corporate development team of Daimler, looking at investing in and acquiring mobility and transportation companies. And that sort of put me even more on the path of investing. And then I ended up getting selected for a fellowship called the Henry Crown Fellowship. It lives within the Aspen Institute. And the humble brag is that it's the most prestigious fellowship you've never heard of. And it's usually 21 to 22, mostly entrepreneurs who've had exits at an inflection point. And they tagline it success to significance, and they bond us together through a very selective process. And then we, as part of the commitment to the fellowship, we have to do a venture. And so I looked at my body of work now post-Army. I'm like, well, I've been starting companies with military veterans. I've been investing in companies with military veterans. At that time, we deployed a little over $10 million, 3/4 of it going to vets. And so I said to the fellowship and to my business partner, I'm going to let this be my venture. I think there's a story here around backing military veterans in entrepreneurship. Now, I'll caveat, you do not have to be a military veteran. Our tagline is we invest in extraordinary leadership. So we look for extremely strong leadership skills. But that was the story. And so for the side hustle, I told Daimler, love you guys, I'm out. I'm going to do my own fund. And then we raised a venture capital, $20 million fund 1. And now we're in our fund 2. And we're investing out of fund 2 and fundraising for another few months. And I love it. I love what I do now. Just constant exposure to new ideas, passionate founders every day. And it pulls your brain in different directions. You just I never knew, I'll show you, I never knew a few days ago that I would meet the founder of this company called Sensate. And we usually don't invest in hardware, for the record, and which you set on about right here, top of your chest, and it sort of hyper optimizes meditation. And they have their own app. And it's like, wow. And badass woman founder, crushing. Didn't think I'd get this a week ago, right? It's just like, that's one of the benefits of venture, like all these different ideas. That's like the university in a way, right? A lot of ideas. So that's where I am now. I'm doing the venture capital thing. And so veteran turned entrepreneur turned investor.
And PhD and thrown in there too.
Yeah, PhD.
Great, thank you so much. Yeah, thank you. Well, so we'll stop the recording now and now open it up to questions. So